Hello and welcome to Recharge and Rise. I'm Emma Draycott, your host and founder of this experience, and I'm an anxiety and burnout freedom therapist and hypnotherapist. And I'm so blessed and excited to have a conversation with Amie, who has her own experiences of having ADHD and masking and experiencing cycles of burnout through her life. So she's now an ADHD business coach and she supports others to have simple strategies so that they don't continue to go through the burnout cycle. So Amie, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Emma.
Oh, you're so welcome. So I'd love to know, so a little bit, we know that I've just shared about the cycles that you were going through. I'd love to know what led you, if you want to share a bit more, what led you to do what you do now.
Of course, thank you so much. So hi everyone who's listening. My name is Amie, as Emma mentioned, and to give you a bit of backstory to my whole journey, I actually got diagnosed with ADHD when I was 11 years of age, and I'm now 30, 30 in December. Um, and so when I got diagnosed at the age of 11, I was actually diagnosed with a condition called ADD, which is now not really classed as a separate entity. It's under the neurodiverse category and sort of a comorbidity of ADHD. But at the time, the research wasn't really out there, and it was sort of like being lumped with this information, but not really understanding how much that was impacting my life. So I pretty much went through my whole entire life up until my later 20s, I'd say like 26, 27, just dealing with the challenges that life throws at you and dealing with them, having a neurodiversity, and not really understanding why just general life was such a challenge for me to manage, and then not really having this clarity that it was because of the ADHD. It was almost like the link wasn't put together. And then I don't really remember what the pivotal point was, whether there was more information about it on social media, but I think just from my own perspective, I had a really bad meltdown, I think, in 2019, just before COVID. And I think that was a highlight to me that something bigger to the picture was going on. Throughout this whole time, I had been in the sort of the performing industry. That's where I started off. In the West End doing bits and bobs with that, and then moved into the fitness industry. So I was always sort of in, a very active industry. But then it was sort of, around that time where the meltdown happened, we hit really, intense burnout. And then COVID happened, and it was very much all happening at once. So I had to move back home with my parents, and I was sort of reevaluating everything. And then that was when I started to look into, oh wow, ADHD has actually been impacting me a lot more than I realized throughout this whole time. So I guess, to cut the long story short, it then brings me up to where I am today, where I started to, develop my online business, which was kind of encouraged after COVID more so. And we started to fitness coach in the online space. And then I started to take on more of the role of helping women that have ADHD through fitness. And then building on that, I realized that actually they didn't need just a fitness plan. They needed to actually learn what the root cause to their barriers were, which I guess is relation to you, Emma, and your obviously subconscious reprogramming background as well. And then my passion started to come from my own journey of learning how to run an online business with ADHD, and really realizing that I could relate and support women in that way as well. And that kind of leads me to where I am today. And I guess from a personal perspective, I dabbled with medication. It wasn't right for me. And I just realized that, again, it was sort of highlighting these symptoms that I had and just enabling me to push past and mask this all the time. So I decided to really take a step back and get to the root cause of it, and go down my own healing journey as well, where I started to rewire my limiting beliefs around having ADHD and truly trying to use it to my advantage.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story, and I can really feel the authenticity in that. So thank you for sharing. If you feel comfortable to, if not, we'll do it from a client's perspective or the kind of work that you do. But I'm wondering around, you talk about root cause, getting to the root cause, because people may think, well, the root cause is ADHD. So could you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by root cause?
I love that question, Emma. Thank you so much. Well, I guess this brings up a big conversation that I'm very much neutral in, to be honest, where it's sort of is ADHD nurture versus nature versus nurture? And obviously, there is evidence to suggest that it is hereditary. So, likely, if your parents have a neurodiversity, you also have a neurodiversity. However, there is also another conversation to talk about where it is elevating the level of experiences you had as a child growing up around trauma, whether that has a big impact in the elevation of your symptoms. So I'm very much on the fence about it. I believe that obviously it is a neurological imbalance in the brain, and that is something that trauma cannot, well, I mean, you may think differently, but I feel like, if you were to look at two brains, a neurotypical and neurodiverse on a screen, they would look different scientifically. However, how that neurodiversity presents itself in the individual is very much down to their experiences and the trauma that they have experienced growing up. So, therefore, if we can, or I can, work with my client to understand what their experiences are throughout their life and how that has elevated their symptoms, maybe clearing that is going to help them moving forwards.
I recognise what you're saying there, and yeah, that in terms of the brain, the difference, I can reiterate that, confirm, and also trauma does that too, in terms of the different, it changes the brain as well. So I can see why, I absolutely believe in going into root causes, because actually if we I talk about putting a plaster on things, so we just put a plaster on things, just resurfaces in another in another wound in another way. So I really believe in getting to the root causes as well. And of course, our experiences do shape us and impact on how, I imagine, especially with ADHD, so you can share this with me. Um, I imagine it does really impact on how people feel about themselves. So you mentioned in your own story about it impacted on how you viewed yourself in the world, and I imagine you see that for clients as well. Um, you know, how does that come out in the clients that you work with? How does it present itself?
Yeah, so low self-esteem, I guess. Oh, so I think a few different ways because, if you're looking at, we can talk about different types of clients that I have on board. You're talking to a woman that is 50 years of age and she's gone through her whole life completely thinking that she's just broken pretty much, and that, she's been told that she's just over dramatic, over anxious, she's depressed, she's hormonal, all of these things. So she's not really been encouraged or supported or motivated to be advocated for in that sense. So she's been told all of her life that she has been a bit of a burden, and there's nothing that can be done to support her. So then she gets to 50 and she finds out she has ADHD, and it's almost like this cry of grief and relief that she's not absolutely broken and that there is a reason for that. And I know that some would argue, well, yeah, of course, like you get told you've got depression, you get told you've got anxiety, that would give you enough of a reason to understand why you are the way you are. But I don't know why. I just feel like having some clarity that you have ADHD, I think that just brings it into, because I feel like these terms, which they shouldn't be, but it's like, oh, it just doesn't seem as real when somebody says to you, oh, it's just a bit of anxiety or it's a bit of depression. So I think from that perspective, that can really impact self-esteem. From a personal perspective, from my perspective, I definitely find that I had a very interesting upbringing. I'm very open about it. There was like a bit of an oxymoron to the situation, because on one side of things, I was always encouraged to be the overachiever. I was always the person that people were drawn to, just from a presence perspective. My parents pushed me to try and succeed in everything that I did succeed in, but my needs weren't met in that either. So outwardly I was pushed, but the support I needed and the validation I needed about my neurodiversity wasn't necessarily there. So I think that had a huge dent on my self-esteem as well, growing up too.
Of course, yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And I guess that, we all have different needs, don't we? And I imagine, you're growing up, you don't quite understand, other people around you don't understand your needs or how to meet them. You just talked about a client who got to 50. And in terms of labels, it's very common for people to be misdiagnosed, isn't it? Actually, might be presenting with ADHD symptoms, but actually are diagnosed with anxiety, for example. I know that's a huge link. I work with a lot of women that come for support around anxiety, and when we get into conversations about how they function, and just I get to understand them more, I can see traits of ADHD and they can see it in themselves, and they do cross over. And also, of course, with neurodiversity as well, there is a spectrum and they cross over too. So I like to see people in the way that we are our individual person. We have our own experiences of life that shape us and impact us. And we might have other, conditions, illnesses, health problems, different ways that our brain function, etc. But all of that, all of it implements or comes together to who we are. So it's not usually as simple to say that experience is this and that experience comes from that. So when you talked about root cause, it talks to me, because I'm like, yeah, because you can have ADHD but also have different experiences in your life that exacerbate those symptoms or actually help them.
Well, that's it. And I really like that you brought all of that up, because it's sort of like you may see two different types of children. The one child has been put in foster care and they are uprooted from their home, they're living in fight or flight, they're in survival mode, they don't feel very safe. That child may have ADHD, but that may lead them to crime, self-destruction, just really acting up in that, in ways that they were lacking in their childhood. Whereas then you've got another child that had a good, secure upbringing, good education, and they have their struggles too, but they may not be as flamboyant because of that.
Yeah, it's we know our early life experiences impact on things that we then our own behaviours. So it can come out in different ways. I think this puts us perfectly on talking about masking. Do you want to tell me about what masking is?
100%. So this actually ties us on nicely to kind of what I was talking about, where my experiences of having to uphold this level of perfectionism and overachieving, because it's like, I know I'm talking about the subconscious mind a lot, but it is what a big chunk of our brain is made up of. And I find that, going back to the self-esteem piece, it's almost like, okay, I don't feel good enough, but for some reason people are responding really well to me when I'm acting like this, so therefore I'm going to keep doing that. And that is exactly what ADHD masking is, because I'm more likely, I'm scared to show who I truly am, which isn't always super, super bubbly, which isn't always super, super extroverted. Sometimes I am in a bad mood. Sometimes I am not wanting to speak to anyone, as natural human beings do. But especially from a neurodiverse perspective, it's like the most contradictory condition to have, because we are more inclined to be a little bit more extroverted, but because of the lack of barrier around how receptive we are to energy, we can't uphold that for a long period of time. So therefore burnout happens quicker, we get energetically drained quicker. But to somebody else that may not be not that to us, so how can I explain it, from our perspective, to somebody else that may not be the type of behavior that we would get validated for. So why would we want to share that and show that? So it's easier to uphold this image of always outwardly being the best versions of ourselves. So I guess that is to explain to you in the simplest of way what masking is. It's upholding this image that is perceived to be, it could look different to different individuals, but the very classic is, I don't have any struggles, I'm always on my A game 24/7, I am a boss babe. I don't know if you're a man, you're an absolute pioneer in your career, and you're on it 24/7, you're a great person in all areas, you don't have any flaws, you're able to say yes to everything, and that, and then but really inside you're crippling. And how I always teach my clients, I did a whole webinar, and this is how to sort of, because a lot of people had questions around, well, how do I know if I'm masking? Because it's very complicated, it's very confusing. And that is correct, it is, because it takes a lot of shadow work, I guess, to really take a step back and reflect and be like, was I there? Was I not? But how I really understand it is if I am in an environment where I'm having to hold this level of energetic presence for a long, long time, to the point where I need to go to the bathroom and I need to have a moment to myself, and or I feel like I'm pushing past the point where I'm on the brink of tears, that's when I know that I am masking.
Yeah, and I imagine that is actually quite complicated. And I'm acknowledging as well that there is an element of masking it for all people, really, as because that socialization of what is expected, but the difference is the impact of that. So actually, when you're masking a neurodivergency, it's the level of which you're needing to mask beyond what would be natural for you, and the impact that then has.
100%, Emma. I think that's a really fantastic way of summarizing it. And another thing just popped into my head as well is that I think, like, from my perspective, I used to have a really weird what do you call it, not concept, what would you call it, not, I can't think of the word. I'm literally deep in my luteal phase right now, so that's probably why. But I had a weird thing around telling employers that I had ADHD. So I was worried that if I did, then I would be less able to do my job. So I guess in a way that's a form of masking as well, because I'd rather act like I'm not, but then it's counterproductive because eventually I would have crumbled and they would have seen something happen anyways.
Yeah, because actually, like you say, it's when you are masking, you're more prone then to burning out and having cycles of burnout, because actually it's not, it's not normal, that's not the right word, but to withhold that amount of energy and also to keep up that standard is exhausting, because it's completely, masking is really when it's against, it's not natural to how you want to be or show up at that time, but you are pretending, you are matching for also that. This leads on actually for that acceptance, and this is where I said I do believe that there is, for every person, I think there's an element where we match the standards that we think are expected, or we act in a certain way to fit in, because we are human beings. Our connection to others is really important, but there is another layer, isn't there, with ADHD, and it's a symptom that I don't think many people actually even know about or experience. So could you talk to us a little bit about rejection sensitivity and the impact that has?
100%, and this is really nice. It's all weaving in as the plot thickens. But yeah, so I get this question a lot around ADHD, and I used to struggle to kind of explain it to people. in a way where it didn't just look like you were a little bit hyperactive, you had issues with concentrate, because that's initially everybody's go-to, isn't it? Oh, you have ADHD, you must have trouble concentrating. And then it comes down to the point of, well, everybody must have a little bit of ADHD because everybody struggles with concentration, everybody struggles with procrastination. So true. It is true. Even neurotypical people struggle with it. And I think I really want to highlight that it's not just, a neurodivergent thing. Like, there will be a lot of crossovers, which is something that you highlighted earlier, Emma, about even masking, like neurodiverse people and neurotypical people mask. It's a societal thing, especially with the society that we're in today. So how I like to really explain ADHD and what sets it apart from somebody that may be neurotypical is three elements, really. And I've kind of created this concept myself. I haven't created the terminologies, of course, but like how I explain it. So I like to think of it in like you can visualize it in like a pie, or I don't know, a diagram, whatever you think. But basically there are three components: rejection sensitivity, executive dysfunctioning, and emotional dysregulation. And the reason why I feel like these three elements of ADHD, because the irony is as well, if you were to look at the subcategories, they would all cross over, but it really does highlight the extremities of these tendencies. Now, to put it into words, obviously part of having ADHD is emotional dysregulation. So we have issues in the brain. I don't say issues, that's not a very empowering word. We have imbalances in the brain that enable emotions to be felt stronger, and we're able to regulate and rationalize how to bring those emotions back down to a neutral space. Okay, so if you think about an emotion, a strong emotions, one of the strong emotions that we feel, jealousy, rejection, and then all of the others in the mix as well, but rejection is one of them. Now, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, is a really big part of ADHD because, like I'm speaking about with the emotional dysregulation, because of that, we are likely to feel emotions on a physical level as well as a mentally and physically, basically. So rejection sensitivity in its simplest of forms would be that you said something to me, I would perceive it as being a rejection. But instead of me just being like, oh God, that felt a bit awful, that wasn't very nice, that would hurt me on a physical, like a pain. It would pain me on a different level. Okay. And it is, there's a lot of research being done. I find it really fascinating at the moment, but they're speaking about how it can be a separate condition in itself. So it's not actually just linked to ADHD, but because of the dysregulation of emotions and our ability to feel things, it's like we don't have the filter that neurotypical people have, where we're able to put that barrier in place. We see somebody in pain, we don't feel that. But unfortunately, when you have something like ADHD or autism or other conditions on a neurodiverse spectrum, we don't have that filter, so therefore we're going to feel that on a deeper level. And rejection sensitivity is a really common trait of that with ADHD. And also to highlight that it is your perception of rejection as well, which makes it even more complex, because somebody may just be very direct with you and you take that as personally a rejection.
Thank you for sharing that, because I don't think many people would know that exists, and it might make a lot of sense to people. But this is where I often I bring it back down to also persons as well, because there's also other reasons that we might feel, empaths, highly sensitivity. So they all do really interlink. So you're more likely to have a sensitive nervous system if you have ADHD. It's kind of part of it, but equally you can have a sensitive nervous system without having a diagnosis of ADHD as well. But so often a lot of the experiences, I'm like, these are human experiences, and then you can understand why then our younger years would make a difference in how that plays out. But this is not, I'm not undermining ADHD, don't want to be misconstrued, because actually there is a level of intensity, isn't there? There's a level of what is like neurotypical and a normal level of being able to emotionally regulate or to filter at baseline when that person's all good, versus like actually that's just not as easy when you have a diagnosis of ADHD. But it's not impossible. And
Yeah.
there's fluctuations as well, because actually when somebody's mental health, emotional health and physical needs are met really well, so you might have a diagnosis of ADHD, but you're managing it really well, you might actually be absolutely managing the sensitivity amazing. And you can have another person who doesn't have a diagnosis but is really struggling to cope right now, and their sensitivity. So just
Mm,
wanted to like share that there are some, and I
yes.
think because as well that people are saying, oh well, everyone's, I'm just being mindful that there is talk about, oh, you know, everyone's got ADHD and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to talk to that and normalize it of, you know, on that spectrum, because I do acknowledge that people can have sensitivities and symptoms without ADHD, but because of what else is going on in life. But I do not want to devalue what it's actually like to experience a neurodivergency.
100%. And I really like the fact that you've spoken about that, because I think just on the flip side of it as well, anybody listening to this, I hope that gives you a bit of security to know that you can be a highly sensitive person, like Emma said, and you can experience rejection sensitivity, but you may not have to put yourself under the stress of thinking that you have a neurodiversity as well. And I think that that's another thing to put into play as well, is that I think almost it can add stress to somebody if they are listening to something like this, or something online or a podcast, and they think, oh my god, maybe I've got ADHD. You may not, you may just have like a, you know, the RSD section, or you may just be a highly sensitive person, like you said, Emma. And I think going back to the you know, the regulated and dysregulated nervous system, my personal circumstances in the moment have been very, very stressful. And I remember when I was in the peak of it a couple of months ago, like I was reading emails like they were a personal attack, and they weren't, you know. And I could probably sit here now and feel a little bit more regulated and read something and be like, okay, I wouldn't perceive it in that way.
Thank you for sharing that. What was the other two areas? So we talked about rejection sensitivity. Do you want to talk a bit about the other two areas of your
Yeah, so
pie?
I would probably highlight the emotional dysregulation. Probably we'll touch upon that at the end, because I don't feel like it's as big. But the second one is definitely executive dysfunctioning. So again, I think this one is probably a little bit bigger to highlight. I would probably say that rejection sensitivity is obviously really a really good way to describe how somebody would feel emotions with ADHD and the lack of control around that. But I think that executive dysfunctioning as a category is probably where you would be able to plonk yourself to see whether you do have it or not. So I don't know, Emma, like I'm going to ask you a question. Do you obviously categorize yourself, I presume, as neurotypical?
So I'm actually neurodivergent, but I haven't got a diagnosis of ADHD. So do you want to ask me ADHD
Wow.
questions?
No, it's all good. No, I like how you are as a person, and I guess this is
Yeah.
testament to your aura and your work that you've done. You know, you do seem very regulated, which is amazing. But no, I was just trying to like put a comparison in the mix of like how if you're a neurotypical person, you may not find executive dysfunctioning as evident in your life. And what I mean by executive dysfunctioning is, okay, so the biggest one that I would say a lot of people can relate to, task transitioning. Okay. So executive dysfunctioning can come under a lot of different categories, or a lot of different categories come under that subcategory. But task transitioning, so your brain is on one task and then you have to move on to another task, that can then often put you in task paralysis, which is really, really challenging. There will be a lot of like starting tasks and then not finishing them and moving on to another task as well. So those kind of things often are where you really can evidently see the difference between somebody who's neurodiverse and neurotypical, because neurotypical people, and that's not just me categorizing neurotypical people, but I know from experience being around neurotypical people, I ask them, do they have this issue? And yeah, they may have a little bit of a moment where they're like, oh, my brain's all over the place, just moving on to this next task, but they're able to get back into another task. Whereas for somebody with ADHD, that may just be too much. And then also like paralysis is a really big one, where you subconsciously know that you've got an appointment at 3 p.m, but you can't do anything until that appointment's done. Those are the kind of things that we're talking about with executive dysfunctioning. And I haven't got my list up in front of me right now, but they're the things that stick in my head about how to describe the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. From my understanding, there's different concepts around time management. So it might seem that there's a lot of forgetfulness, but it's the concept of the time that differs, and like task sequencing, organization, and obviously debilitating experiences within those as well, and the switching of, because I guess like when people say attention like deficit, well, it's attention deficit, isn't it? And people talk about struggling with attention. It is really beyond that. And we do live in a society where and actually I wrote an article about this, because our concentration is constantly being hijacked, but it doesn't mean that we have a concentration like deficit. It's just literally, we've got a notification going on, we've got a ringing going on. Oh, what's that out the window? Oh, there's a knock, there's a noise. There's a lot of things that interrupt our flow of concentration.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe it is impacted because of that. So we're not as used to concentrating and getting in flow. Talking about flow, actually, would you share a little bit about the because I think it is a misconception that people with ADHD can hold attention for a long period of time, but that is actually, there's the hyperfixation and the concentration, isn't there? So do you just want to do a bit of myth busting for us?
Myth busting. Yeah, of course. So, I mean, this is where it gets tricky. Well, I say tricky, not tricky, but I think a lot of people, so number one, obviously, if any of you don't know, obviously hyperfocus is where obviously we can hyperfocus on tasks for a very, very, very long period of time. So it is the biggest contradiction ever, because like you just said, Emma, people with ADHD can't concentrate, but then they have this thing called hyperfocus where they can concentrate. And when I think being an entrepreneur and like having to self-train myself and self-discipline myself to be very good with working on a laptop, I'm not there entirely, and it depends on my regulated state as well, of course. But when I was sort of looking at best ways to work and best ways to optimize my productivity, obviously the first thing you type in on Google productivity methods, the Pomodoro method comes up, right? And yeah, fantastic, great. It was really good that you could concentrate on something for 20 minutes and then take a 10-minute break, 20 minutes, take a 10-minute break. But I actually think that hyperfocus, when used in the right way, is actually really powerful, and it can be used to your advantage. Because I think that I don't really know how to, with the myth, would you say that, are you just wondering whether there is sort of a misconception as to, could you explain?
Yeah, I think the misconception is that with ADHD that you can't hold concentration,
Right.
because it's attention deficit. I think there's a misconception that means that you can't concentrate for a period of time, but that's not true.
It's really not true. Okay, yeah, I'm with you now. So no, it's not true, because I've definitely been stuck in something for hours on end, and I focus, and like I think it's just about, as well, there's this awful sort of shame element of it, being like, oh my god, you shouldn't be concentrating for that long, that's really not that's dangerous if you're holding the fact that you need to go to the bathroom for that long. Yeah, of course there is like healthy limits with that as well, but I'm a firm believer that even though I have ADHD and potential autism, that I I've never looked at it as about, I just have to train myself and build my tolerance up. So, for example, there was a certain task that I had to do within my online business that every single Monday I had to do client check-ins. And that wasn't client calls, it was reading a form from a client, pre-recording the feedback, sending it to them, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And I remember I used to hate Mondays because of the client check-ins, because I couldn't sit still, I couldn't focus for a long period of time. And it took me about a year to train myself to build up that tolerance. And now every single Monday I wake up, I know what I need to do for that's my task for the day. So I think there's like three moving parts to this. I don't believe that you can't concentrate for long periods of time with ADHD. I believe that there's a time and a place for certain tasks that you should concentrate for longer, and you can train yourself to do that over time. But then I also believe that there is that element of making sure that you do leave space for your like little short attention span tendencies that you do have as well. Like I like to have like days where I kind of go into this strange sort of like organized chaos where I won't really have a structure to my tasks that I need to do. I'll just do random things, and an email here or something else there, and that really plays up to my impulsivity of it as well, because I'm still getting these tasks done. But I think that it is just important to highlight that it may take you a little bit longer to train yourself to be disciplined, because your brain is naturally inclined to want to chase the dopamine and the impulsivity because of your ADHD.
Thank you for sharing that. I'd love to know, how do you, or where do you see in your clients and for yourself, that where actually your tendencies, your personal tendencies, are actually empowering you, or how can you use them to your advantage in an empowering way?
Yeah, so I think going back to the hyper focus, so I think that I can definitely use that to my advantage, especially working with hyper focus under pressure. So I think that that is one that I know, and albeit maybe not that healthy, but I don't think that there should be shame around it, as long as you've got the mechanisms to be able to support yourself with the slight come down that comes from that. But say I've got a project on and I know that that deadline is, wherever it is, I'm more than likely going to work better and I'm under more pressure towards the end of that deadline and really pull it out of the bag then. But I don't think that that is necessarily something that should enable you to have shame around it. I think that's really empowering, because you can literally pull something together. And I've tried to kind of be more prepared, and yeah, there are ways that you can train yourself to do it, but why not use that to your advantage as well? That determination element of, I know that I've got this coming up, I can bust out 3 weeks worth of work in 3 days, but just making sure then that you've got the tools. And just what I do with my clients, okay, you pushed yourself, what are you going to do to give yourself that self-care now? That's not just push through that and ignore our needs around that. I think as well, just, I guess this is obviously relative to the person, but for me, I am incredibly empathetic and able to really read somebody's emotions and be emotionally in tune with myself and my clients. And I think that that is not a skill that can be taught a lot of the time. And I remember, so I was on a business mentorship program last year, and we used to have to record the calls that we had with potential clients. And it was a bit Dragon's Den-y, obviously you have to record your call, and it's like, get your popcorn, everyone that's listen in on the call. And it's all very like, oh, and then the person would give you feedback. And I used to get people say all the time, like, how do you emotionally connect to somebody like that? Like, you have that person really open up. And I think it's just that natural warming to be able to create that safe space for somebody. And as much as you are receptive to emotions, you are able to emotionally hold space for somebody else as well. So I think that's another one that I definitely see a lot of clients that are neurodivergent have that as a superpower as well. So yeah, I think they're the two things that I can really think about off the top of my head, and I'm sure as we carry on there will be other things that I can think of too. But I think it's just sort of, yeah, being this sort of there's an element of, I think when you have neurodiversity, a little bit fearless, a little bit, I'm willing to take those risks, and the impulsivity of it as well, albeit it's bitten me in the bum on so many occasions. And I'm actually learning to get used to not being in chaos all the time, but being able to operate in that environment, and being able to, jump into things that are out of your comfort zone, I think is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, so using that impulsivity there to be able to do things that maybe feel a bit riskier or scarier, but that potentially can really pay off compared to if you didn't take that chance. I hear from what you're saying there in terms of managing symptoms is or experiences is there are experience things like work where you're like you've taught yourself and you've trained yourself to be able to do certain tasks, but then there's clearly others where you're like, I'm not going to make myself do it when my brain's not online for that. So for example, my example of that was, if you're used to doing something before a deadline and that's where you can pull it out of the bag, then actually trying to make yourself do it a month in advance isn't actually probably the way to go, because there's a balance, isn't there, between forcing ourselves, and I think this for, again, going back to our human experiences, and I'd say this for anybody that I was working with, work with your natural tendencies, work with it where you can rather than against it, because, and I see it like this, if you're trying to, I don't know, you're the round peg and you're trying to put yourself into a square hole,
Yeah.
you don't fit, and then you feel like you don't fit. So we are all different. We have all different preferences. Our brains work differently. And I think sometimes just trying to make ourselves do something in a certain way just makes us feel more inadequate, tired, burnt out.
Oh, you're so right, Emma. And I've tried to do this on so many occasions about, and that's another topic we could talk about. I could literally go on for this for hours about, PDA, pathological demand avoidance as well, where especially from a neurodivergent perspective, you may be inclined to want to do something. The minute somebody pushes you to do it, you push away from it. And it's kind of that concept as well, with you're trying to shove yourself into a certain category. And if you actually took the pressure off yourself, you're probably more inclined to want to do it anyways. And I think that you're so right. It is about finding that balance, especially as a business owner, because ultimately I think there is something about taking that ownership and radical responsibility and just being like, this is how I do things. This is my show. I'm going to run it this way. And I can guarantee when you advocate for yourself in that way, nobody will say anything to you, because you're saying it with such integrity and confidence to yourself. Like, it takes a long time to build up that confidence, but I've tried to over systemize things. I've tried to overdo things in certain ways, and sometimes it's not been the right thing for me, and it's ended up not working out in my favor anyways. Whereas other things, obviously, I know I'm starting to create an awareness around the fact that I know that I could probably push my work capacity for 2 weeks at a time, and then I have to kind of have a week where I'm still working but not to that full extent, and that for me is my balance. And I think the only challenge to, if you really want to become a boss at utilizing your talents, and like you said, Emma, the way that you work, then I think that it just becomes a lot of self-reflection work as well, to just take a step back and really think, that worked, that didn't, which is probably the hardest part at times.
Yeah, stepping back in that self-reflection. And also, as you were sharing that, what came to mind is those shoulds. I should do it this way. I should be, I've seen people feel like they should do all sorts of different things, but actually it's not really what they want. It's not aligned with them. And actually maybe it's just not how they work. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes like just accepting like however your brain works, that's the way that it works, and work with it.
Yeah.
Unless you want to then push what I would call like the self leadership, where you're like, okay, not my preference of way of
Yeah.
doing that, but like you were saying with your client videos, like this is what I want to do in my business, or it's what I've got to do, and I can lead myself through that, even though it's not my perfect skill set or the way that I'd want to do it. So thank you for sharing this lovely conversation.
My
Is
pleasure.
there anything else that you want to share before we finish today?
Oh gosh, I don't think so. I think just like a little summary on what you just said there. I think that, it is about finding that balance between, don't think that if you do have ADHD, then you can't train yourself to do things that may seem hard, but it is also okay to lean into what works for you as well. So I think there needs to be that reality that, I think that sometimes we can excuse our resistance for, things that we have in our lives, whether that's a condition or something. But I don't want anybody to think that that's like a limiting factor. Like me, I've proven that I can do something that I very much resisted. It took me a year, but I got there. So that's just proof to you guys that you can do it as well. But also make sure that you're not trying to squeeze yourself into a box when, you can very much live your life in alignment with having a neurodiversity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where you really find that connection to your authenticity and also just feels better. Like when you're not pushing against what is natural for you, whether that be your energy, your personality, your characteristics, how your brain functions. So I think that's a really strong message that has come out today. So before we come to the end, could you please share what your gorgeous gift is to our listeners?
Yeah, so if anybody's listening and they are interested in getting to know me more and getting into my world, then it's actually a really great time that this has all come about. And I'm very grateful that Emma has invited me on to talk to you guys because I'm running a group coaching program for how many months is it? It's about 4 or 5 months. But the great thing is, the first month we are offering for free. And there is no obligation to want to continue after that. You can just join for free on the first month. See if you really enjoy the experience, and you're more than welcome to continue. But the group coaching program will all be around sort of learning how to manage your ADHD on a deeper level. So the stuff that we've spoken about, but we really do go into it in more depth. So over the month, you'll hopefully feel empowered and have skills that you're able to transfer into your personal and work life to manage your ADHD holistically, and to also learn how to educate yourself a little bit more around the condition as well. So yeah, if you are interested, then I'll share all the details with Emma.
Yeah, that's amazing. It will be below this video so that you can check it out there. So I want to thank you so much for this gorgeous conversation. I also want to thank our listeners for being here, for sharing this time and space and for putting themselves first. And a gentle reminder that if you haven't already, my free gift to you is to join me on a 3-day masterclass experience where I will be sharing your freedom formula of how you can break free from anxiety and burnout. So the link will be below there. So thank you very much. And I'll see the listeners on a different video. And I'm sure I will do you too as well. So thank you for being here, Amie, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye.
Thank you for holding space today, Emma, and I really appreciate it. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye bye.